Welcome to The Source, where we combine the headlines with in-depth conversations with the newsmakers themselves. Sitting in for Pinky Webb, I'm Menchu Macapagal. Today on the program, President Bongbong Marcos summons the Chinese ambassador after China deployed a military-grade laser against the Philippine Coast Guard. The Philippines lodges a new diplomatic protest against China's maritime activities in the West Philippine Sea. Former National Security Advisor Clarita Carlos joins us on the show. And nations criticize China for provocative actions in the territorial dispute. National security expert Rommel Banlaoi tells us more. President Bongbong Marcos summons Chinese envoy to the Philippines, Wang Xilian, over the rising frequency and intensity of China's actions against the Philippine Coast Guard and Filipino fishermen. The latest incident, China's use of military-grade laser against a PCG vessel in Ayungin Shoal. Beijing's foreign ministry meanwhile claiming that the United States is trying to intimidate China by invoking its mutual defense treaty with the Philippines. Let's go straight to the source of the story, former National Security Advisor Clarita Carlos. Good morning, ma'am, and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Menchu. Good morning.
Ma'am, as former National Security Advisor, can you weigh in on the implications of the latest incident involving the Chinese Coast Guard and the Philippine Coast Guard near Ayungin Shoal in the West Philippine Sea?
A number of dimensions, Menchu. First of all, the immediate effect on the retinas of our magigiting na Coast Guard, no? Philippine Coast Guard. I asked one of the experts in laser technology, and they said that this can harm very quickly, because the eyes cannot blink quickly enough to cover our eyes. It can harm the retina of the eyes with really very, very severe effects. And then this is part of what's called optical distractors rather, which is, an escalating use of these kinds of technology short of war, no? And China has been doing this even before I was NSA, while I was NSA, after I resigned. And we have been telling them, their ambassador has come to my office many times, top security officials, and we have been stressing to them the implications of their bellicosity, the increasing aggressiveness in the South China Sea. This is a source of major concern for all of us because China's political leadership is talking from so many sides of his mouth, talking about shared prosperity, shared future, and yet their actions belie, those kinds of declarations.
Yes, we'll be talking more about those in a little bit, but, let's go back to the incident because China claimed it was actually the Philippine Coast Guard who intruded in what they claimed as their waters, prompting its Coast Guard personnel to retaliate and use military-grade lasers. Do you think the incident merited the use of military-grade laser light?
Actually, because when I was NSA, I was privy to what China has been doing, which was not put in the public realm. And I, in fact, advised the Philippine Coast Guard to put it in the public realm so the public will know what they're doing. Do you know, Menchu, one time, I can't remember now how many months ago, in the same place, one of the people in the Chinese Coast Guard removed the cover of their guns. When you remove the cover of the guns, you must be a stupid person not to know what that means. Okay, remove the cover of the gun at the time when we were resupplying our Marines in the Ayungin Shoal. Of course, you know that our Marines are there and guarding our territory. So this is contested territory. China cannot say that this is theirs because even the arbitral tribunal dismissed the claim of China that there is a basis for the 9-dash line. So that is where we're going. So this is an escalation because, the use of laser is something that is in fact a violation of the Geneva Convention.
That's right. I was just going to ask, is this considered legal under UNCLOS? Because you said nga that there was this incident where they removed the cover of their guns. And then this time they used these military-grade lasers. So is this considered legal? And if not, like what actions can the government take since the use of lasers caused temporary blindness among the Filipino personnel? And it seems like their actions are escalating.
Well, I think you showed in the first picture Ambassador Wang Silian being summoned by the president. Usually it's Ricky Manalo who will summon the ambassador. But this time, because it is a very, very delicate and sensitive issue, it is the president himself who has summoned Wang Silian. You know, I think we've been doing so many things and we expect to change the behavior of China. They are not changing. How many note verbals have we sent? 203 to my count, last year and this year, no? 203, Menchu.
75
I mean, are we
this year
changing the
alone.
behavior? Sometimes ini-ignore nga nila yung mga note verbal na yan, yung protest natin. So what are we going to do? Let us shift gear. I have indicated this in a memo to the president. Let us start lowering the level of diplomatic relations with them, just to telegraph to them our deep concern about what they're doing and for them to stop doing it. Meaning, let us ask, what's his name, our ambassador in Beijing, get him here and put a charge there. And let us also, Ricky Manalo will inform the ambassador here that there should be a lowering of diplomatic relations. We have done that before, Menchu. Remember, bata pa ka- remember our conflict with Malaysia on Sabah? Yeah, we broke up diplomatic relations with Sabah. We've done it before. We can do it again. Now, remember, the president just came from Japan and they're talking about a status of forces agreement with Japan as well as a Philippine-Japan defense pact. That is really something monumental, a major move, really. Although Japan has been observing in the past 3 years the Balikatan exercises, but a status of forces agreement will give them the legal personality to exercise and train with our AFP. And of course, I'm sure you know who announced the expansion of the EDCA to 4 other bases, and that is the ambassador of the U.S. I wish she did not have to do that because that announcement should have come from us, not from her. No? And yes, there are talks of joint patrol. Ang dami niyan, Menchu, eh. No? Ang daming pwede mong gawin short of going to war.
But, you know, like the Chinese Foreign Ministry and their spokespersons always say that these tactics are meant to intimidate them, but they keep saying that they will not be forced into submission, if you will. I'm paraphrasing there. And it might, do you not think that this might escalate tensions and provoke something that we're not ready for?
Well, everybody hopes that there will not be a war, and that war should not be in our territory. If they want to wage war, let them wage war in their own territories. But yes, let us stop being meek, no? Huwag tayo magpapakumbaba. This is the time for wolf warrior diplomacy, no? Which means really kick ass and let us go on the offensive because they paulit-ulit nyo nang ginagawa to, sobra ng abuso ninyo, no? So no. And some people are fearing na hindi daw mabibili yung ating saging, pineapple, coconut oil. Abay, maghanap ka ng market. Sila lang bang market natin? Hello?
Ma'am, you mentioned earlier that you already brought this up with President Bongbong Marcos to kind of be more forceful and to cut diplomatic ties or something to that effect. What was the president's reaction to your suggestion?
Well, I did not put in my memo for him to be more forceful. Magagalit siya sa akin. I simply gave him several options nung NSA pa ako. No?
Yes.
Na ito pwede mong gawin kasi paulit-ulit na natin ginagawa to, pare-parehong ginagawa natin and it is not changing the behavior of the antagonist. So how about this? Nagbigay ako sa kanya ng an array of choices eh. Siyempre advisor lang ako, Menchu. Pag advisor ka, either accept yung advice mo o hindi accept. But you know, the president is buffeted by many, many forces, internal, domestic, and international, and foreign, no? Medyo bigyan natin ho siya ng alagwa. Let's give the president an allowance. I don't think he can do otherwise. Eh. Right now, people are saying, you know, crude as the term might be, he's hiding under the skirt of America. Meron ba tayong choice? Parang tinulak tayo ng China sa arms ng Amerika, hindi ba? Oh.
Well, you mentioned earlier nga that President Marcos personally summoned the Chinese envoy Huang Xilian, and I think this is the first time in recent years wherein a Philippine president actually summoned a Chinese ambassador. So, what does this say about Marcos's policy on China and the West Philippine Sea, and how does it really reflect on the real status of relations between our two countries? Kasi di ba nung umuwi siya from China, parang sinabi nga nila that the two countries are friends and they have direct communication with each other. So what does this really say about the real status?
At the beginning of the Marcos administration, he declared three things about China. It's a friend, it's a partner, and it's a neighbor. Nilalaman na natin. Pero mukha ng China, hindi niya nilalaman na ng sinasabi niyang shared prosperity at saka shared future. No? Maglamanan tayo. And as I said, let the president be a little bit more, assertive about what we should do, our superordinate interests, our national interests. And right now, Menchu, for as long as the Mutual Defense Treaty is in place and is operational, then let us make it work. The U.S. is our ally. Has always been an ally since the beginning of our republic in 1946. So, what we're doing is we are enhancing it. If you will recall, the EDCA only proposed 5 bases where on a rotation basis, the American forces will be here. They're going to preposition equipment there. Usually, the equipment is for HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster response. No? And now they're talking about joint patrol. Isa din yan sa laman ng memo ko in the past when I was NSA for joint patrols to be done. I think this has been done in the past. Nagkalkal kami ng kasaysayan yan. It has been done in the past, not necessarily with the Americans, with other countries, no, who are like-minded, who are kindred in spirits like us. And Menchu, if we rely on the UN, we cannot rely on the UN kasi andyan ng China, may veto power yan. Andyan ng Russia, yung kanyang forever friend, no? You rely on ASEAN, hindi din pwede mention kasi wala namang ASEAN 10. Because the countries which are fed by the Mekong River, lahat sila, pagka hinarang ng China yung tubig nang gagaling sa Mekong, rising from China, patay yung downstream countries. Ano yan? Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam. Diba? They're going to demur when we ask for their help. Iba-iba. There is no ASEAN 10. No? Iba-iba, watak-watak yung position nila vis-a-vis China, and for good reason.
Because everyone also is obviously looking out for their own national interests. But, you mentioned earlier the incident of the pointing of the military-grade lasers at our Philippine Coast Guard. It's considered as a weapon. And retired Supreme Court Justice Antonio Carpio said yesterday that the Philippines can invoke its mutual defense treaty with the United States because it constitutes an armed attack. Do you think this is enough grounds? I'm not a lawyer, but there are colliding views in regard to that. But assuming for the sake of discussion that we can invoke that, will the Americans respond in kind? Kasi when you invoke it, that merong respond ng Amerika, ang response ng Amerika, di ba, Menchu? Ibig sabihin, magkikick in din yung Mutual Defense Treaty on their side. Kasi treaty yung natin, ang trato natin yan sa 1951, ratified in 1952. So we'll see where it goes. Pero kasi, yung mga sinabi ko sa iyo kanina, no, yung lowering diplomatic relations, tapos yung, anong pangalan nito, yung joint patrol, tapos meron pala ako nalimutan banggitin, Menchu. Alam mo bang may MOA between Philippine Coast Guard at saka Chinese Coast Guard? Meron. In fact, minention kaya kay Ambassador Huang Xilian, ilang beses na siya nagpupunta sa opisina ko, no? Ang kailangan lang diyan, kasi parang palit-palit sila, minsan Beijing, minsan Manila, dapat time na ng Beijing mag-host niyan. I-open nila yung communication na yon. Let them open the channels of communication because while we are talking, while we're engaging, we're not killing each other. You mentioned joint patrols. Rommel Banlaoi actually said in a previous interview that to prevent escalations of tensions in the West Philippine Sea, dapat na mag-joint patrols ang Pilipinas at ang China. Pero considering that we already had like a joint memorandum of understanding when it came to oil exploration in the area, which the Supreme Court actually already declared as unconstitutional last month. Pero hindi pa rin yun naghinder sa China to escalate tensions there and to escalate their aggression. Do you think that joint patrols with China is still the way to go at this point? Should we explore that, or should it be na yun, i-push yung VFA sa Japan and maybe strengthen alliances with claimant countries?
Well, I agree with Dr. Rommel Banlaoi. He's my student, and we're on the same page on this. Not only joint patrols with China, because the patrols really would be for maritime piracy, HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster response. What I have been saying all along, whether I'm in Manila or in Beijing, is, the 7 artificial islands that they have built, that they should change this into a research station, Menchu. Gawin mo siyang research station, parang nasa Antarctica. And not only that, I want our marine scientists in the UP and elsewhere in the Philippines to be at the front line. Kasi mga marine scientists will treat the ocean, the sea, the contested East and South China Sea as one ocean, one ecology. Magpipinsan yung mga features dyan mga features, mga corals, mga sea plants. They're all related to each other. And there are 6 claimant countries. Isa na tayo sa 6 na yan. So why are we dividing the ocean? Why are we dividing the airspace? Why are we doing all this when wala talagang katuturan yan? Not only that, i-declare nating heritage of mankind ang the whole contested sea. Diba?
All right. Thank you very much, former National Security Advisor Clarita Carlos. We'll be taking a short break. This is The Source on CNN Philippines. Please stay tuned. You're watching The Source on CNN Philippines. I'm Menshu Makapagal. Some powerhouse nations call out China for the recent laser incident in Ayungin Shoal, expressing concern over, quote, intimidatory actions against the Philippines and warning how this development could threaten peace in the region. Let's go straight to the source of the story, national security expert Rommel Banlaoi. Sir, good morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Menshu.
Okay,
Good morning to all. Good morning.
Sir, former National Security Advisor Clarita Carlos just said that there is increasing aggressiveness in the disputed waters and the escalating use of optical distractors is, quote, short of war. Are you seeing a similar pattern?
Well, there is currently a deterioration of overall security situation in the South China Sea as a result of China's increased military and paramilitary activities in the area, more so in the West Philippine Sea. But we have also seen China doing a lot of military and paramilitary activities in the East China Sea involving Japan in the Senkaku or the Diaoyu Islands. So this kind of behavior of China is not unique to the South China Sea. But the deterioration of the security environment is in fact attributed to what I identify as 2 major issues. One issue is the competing national narrative on the South China Sea, and the competing national narratives are in fact compelling parties to behave differently. And second, the second issue that we need to really overcome is that the parties are sending mixed signals with each other, and sending these mixed signals is also creating different behavior on the ground. So we need to overcome these competing national narratives and the sending of mixed signals, because these 2 issues are in fact aggravating what I call the strategic ambiguities in the area, and that is why we find the difficulties of the security situation.
Okay.
So we need to overcome those issues.
So how? How exactly do you do that?
Well, to really address the competing national narratives, we need to sustain the dialogue and communications and consultations. And we have already a lot of platforms to do that. We have bilaterally, we have the bilateral consultative mechanism in the South China Sea that President Marcos wants to sustain under his leadership. And multilaterally, we have the ongoing negotiation on the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. And aside from that, we had platforms provided by the ASEAN Regional Forum and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. And after having all these platforms, we should already understand that China has a narrative, we have our own narrative, and we have to overcome our differences when it comes to this narrative so that we can find a common ground to cooperate rather than compete in the area. So that is why China is doing all these military and paramilitary activities in the South China Sea, because its activities are informed by their national narratives. And we're also doing our routine activities in the Kalayaan Island Group because we are also informed by our national narratives, and our national narratives are informed by our international arbitral victory, and at the same time our national laws, and also provisions from the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea and other existing international laws. So we really need to sit down with China and talk about this clash of narratives and identify where we can work together. And we have already done initial work on that during the previous administration when we pursued the bilateral consultative mechanism in the South China Sea. Like, for example, there are already existing working groups to talk about marine environmental protection, marine environmental research, joint rescue operations. So we have a lot of things to do, even joint development of natural gas in oil. We already have a lot of things that we discussed on the table.
That's right. You mentioned earlier that the lines of communication have been open, and we have all of these joint projects in the works. But and President Marcos has already said he would like to continue his friendly relationship with China. So up to what point should the president continue that friendly relationship, considering the escalation that we're seeing?
We have to be consistent with the messaging that we are delivering to China, and that also applies to China, that China also have to be consistent with the messaging. Like, for example, when the two leaders agreed to pursue friendly consultations, then we do consultations. But what happened during the laser beam incident is that apparently there was no consultation. If communication is open, then China should have been informed about our routine missions, because we normally do that. So laser beam incident could have been avoided if there was communication between the two parties about our routine operations in the Ayungin Shoal to resupply and even rotate our personnel. And China should also exercise self-restraint that will harm our personnel doing the so-called routine mission. So if there was communication, that incident could have been avoided. But apparently, the consultation has not been implemented yet. And we need to implement this not only at the policy level, not only between two leaders, but also on the ground. So we also have to change the realities on the ground.
Okay. So how can the government further protect the Coast Guard and Filipino fishermen in the West Philippine Sea? You said that we need to inform the Chinese Coast Guard of our activities in the West Philippine Sea. But Ayungin Shoal is supposedly within our exclusive economic zone, and they have been conducting patrols in that area as well as the resupply missions for years now.
Because the two parties have different national narratives on the status of the Ayungin Shoal, then we should coordinate our actions in order to avoid unintended violent encounters at sea. We have to coordinate our actions because we have different national positions. China will not surrender its national position despite the fact that the International Arbitral Tribunal dismissed the legal basis of their claim. But we have to face the reality that China is still asserting its national position. So to avoid unintended violent encounter at sea, we need to coordinate our activities in the area to avoid the incident like the laser beam incident and other incidents that we have experienced in the past.
Well, you
So
said
we need to sustain the efforts of the China Coast Guard and the Philippine Coast Guards to really coordinate their actions.
all right. Well, you said very quickly lang po because we're running out of time. You said before that to prevent escalation of conflict in the West Philippine Sea, the Philippines should explore joint patrols with China. But as I asked Professor Carlos earlier, Philippines already had a joint memorandum agreement with China for oil exploration, which, as we mentioned, the SC declared unconstitutional as well. But that did not stop China from continuing its aggression. Do you still feel that this is the way to go? Or should
Yes,
we
that's
push
the way to go.
the VFA with Japan?
Joint patrol may be a loose term, but what we need right now, for the moment, should be coordinated patrols to avoid violent encounters at sea. And at the same time, the joint development of natural gas and oil in the South China Sea is a way ahead. There's no other way but to cooperate because we cannot afford to compete. We cannot afford to be in confrontation with China on that issue. So we just have to iron out our differences and find a common ground. Understand our respective legal regimes when it comes to the joint development of natural gas and oil, because I conducted a study on that. China has a different legal regime. We have a different legal regime. China has a different practice, and we also have a different practice. And we have to share these competing legal regimes and existing practices so that we can iron out our differences and identify where we can cooperate. So that's it. We academics, we have a lot of proposals that will highlight the importance of cooperation rather than competition in the South China Sea.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, national security expert Rommel Banlaoi. And thank you for joining us here on The Source. I'm Menchu Makapagal. You're watching CNN Philippines.